Radical Bowling Technologies is expanding the horizons of their ball motion capabilities with these two new releases. Hey team, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brian, core design engineer with Brunswick Bowling, and today we're taking a look at the new comparison chart that includes the max bias and the Rattler NU. But before we do that, I want to take a closer look at the cores and covers that are on these two new very unique pieces that are really stretching the boundaries of this comparison chart and putting Radical's ball motion in uncharted territories relative to their current product lineup. And we're going to start right here with the new max bias. This textured hybrid HK22 cover is what's housing this monster of an asymmetrical core that is the original max results core. Now I do want to point out that the original results and the results plus had a slightly lower density version of this core, that those numbers came in at 027, 044 for intermediate diff and differential. The maximum results had a bolstered core density which allowed for an 030 intermediate diff and an 050 total differential, so absolutely massive numbers, not maxing out the mass bias or total differential, but as close as you can get, because when you drill into this ball, if you use a strong pin-up layout with the mass bias in the area of the thumb, you are going to blow up the intermediate diff and increase the differential substantially because of how close the nose of this core design is to the cover or the shell of this ball. So any higher than a 50-30 and the ball becomes unusable in terms of the amount of flare potential and how early and diggy it wants to read. So 30-50 is going to be about your max undrilled with the nose this close to the shell, because after drilling you can get intermediate diffs as high as the mid 40s and maybe even higher with an interchangeable system. So you have to make sure that you're aware of what each layout does to this core, because you can get drastic differences in intermediate differential and differential depending on where you put the mass bias, whether the mass bias is in the thumb where you get massive amounts of intermediate differential, or out near the VAL, kicked out, where you're gonna get a lot tamer, smoother reaction due to a lot less intermediate differential in that post-drilled ball. And of course with a pin down layout you can actually really tame the total differential and intermediate differential of this ball as well. So pay close attention to your layouts and make sure you're working with a certified proshop operator who knows your bowler specs, has measured your PAP, tilt, axis rotation, and all of that, because although this ball is easy to make strong, it's also easy to get a little outside the window of the reaction that works well for you. You want to make sure that you're pairing the surface preparation and the layout to your game, because a weapon that is this strong can be a weapon of max bias in the right hands, but in the wrong situations and in the wrong layouts, it can be an early forward rolling ball, or it can be a ball that is very delayed in motion and looks way weaker than you expect it to because of how long this ball can reserve tilt and retain tilt, because the moment arms on the wings of this core and the nose also acting as a moment arm can conserve tilt better than you anticipate for a strong asymmetrical ball. Shout out to my dear friend Mo Pinnell, who was an innovator and a boundary pusher. I'm wearing his signature Mo shirt as we speak. Of course, he's the brainchild of this core design. He and CAD-man Stevie Freshour, who is still doing the radical cores for these balls to this day, were the two that collaborated to push the boundaries of the post-drilled intermediate diff about as high as the industry has ever seen in this max bias and in the previous max results. But of course the big difference here is the new cover. The HK22 cover base is going to be much more naturally clean than that maximum results was, and the textured hybrid cover stock additive package that comes with that HK22 cover base is going to make a quick response in the mid lane. So this isn't going to be the sharpest back ending ball that you've ever seen, because it is so diggy and slows down so fast in the mid lane thanks to the texturing hybrid that this cover stock has in it. So massive core with a very versatile range of drilling options and post-drill resulting numbers, combined with a very early digging version of HK22. But HK22 as a base in general is definitely cleaner than the original textured solid that was on the maximum result. So you're going to see a ball that is naturally easier through the front part of the lane through the head oil, but then slows down quicker when it encounters friction. So be ready for an abrupt response and a relatively smoother back end motion because it uses so much energy in the mid lane. So controlled chaos is the name of the game for this new max bias. Shifting over now and taking a look at the other new, it is the Rattler NU, or Rattler NU for not urethane. And the cover stock is exactly what you anticipate it to be. It is the not urethane cover base, the base that is not reactive, but it's not urethane. And it was originally found on the Hammer New Blue not urethane that came out, just at the beginning of the tour season, just in time for the tour season back in last November. Now, you'll be very familiar with the core inside this ball. It is the Rattler core that was on the Rattler and the Deadly Rattler. Here again now with the Rattler NU at 248 RG and an 035 differential. This is a tour style ball that gives you a moderate amount of flare potential and a medium revving response. Now, I don't normally compare across brands, but this is such a unique product. There's really only one other ball like it, and it is the New Blue. So naturally people are going to beg the question, what is the comparison between them? Well, let's talk first about the core. This is a substantially lower RG. You know, the New Blue in the 258 range, the Rattler in the 248 range, and with small differences in RG, you won't see very much difference, but when the difference between them is this drastic, 10 points in RG, then you are going to see a much earlier, faster revving and tighter spinning core relative to the much more lopey New Blue. So this one is going to be faster revving, and the 035 total differential is going to give you a lot more flare potential. That's going to keep those flare rings from intersecting one another rotation after rotation, which means that you get fresh cover every time the ball makes a rotation, even for the lower rev players. So where the New Blue had very tightly spaced flare rings, the ball didn't rev up very strong in the mid lane. It got through the heads a little better than I think people anticipated for a urethane-like reaction, and went a little harder off of the friction than they might have liked because it was conserving energy for a later down lane response. This Rattler NU kind of rights that and gives you more of an anticipated and expected urethane-like ball motion, where the core is faster revving and the flare spacing is allowing the ball to traction earlier in the mid lane and use more energy in the mid lane, which is more characteristic of urethane balls. Now, this cover does have a reactive characteristic to it, so it is going to hook a little more and traction a little more at the back of the lane with a little more continuation than traditional urethane cover bases, which means that this ball is going to be a little stronger overall than your purple hammers, your black 78 hammers, and just urethane balls in general. But I think the motion shape will be very, very familiar to urethane users. So this is going to be great for a number of use cases, which we'll talk about right here on this new hook chart. You Radical fans should be very familiar with this hook chart. It's available on radicalbowling.com. Just click on the bowling ball that you'd like to see on the comparison chart, scroll all the way down to the resources tab, and this chart is available to view and to download as a PDF. They're sorted by oil volume, with the balls built to handle the most amount of oil on the right side and the balls built to handle less oil volume on the left side of the chart, and by response to friction, with the sharpest responding balls toward the top of the chart and the smoothest responding balls toward the bottom of the chart. We'll start right here with the max bias, and you'll notice that this ball expands the range of capabilities for heavy oil volumes for the current Radical lineup. It's going to be earlier and stronger than a Radical Conspiracy, but this is where a 2D chart doesn't always tell the whole story, which is why I like to talk through it with you guys. It's because this max bias is actually, with the HK22 cover base, a little bit cleaner through the front part of the lane with its slightly lopier revving core with those extreme moment arms that it's got on it. But when it encounters friction, the hook window on the max bias is incredibly short with that high intermediate differential, which means it's going to be an abrupt, fast change of direction in the mid lane and a slightly slower, smoother response at the back of the lane. Now, how do you put this on the chart? Responses in the eye of the beholder. Does that mean more back end motion, or does that mean quicker response in the mid lane friction? But the reality of the situation is most people associate with response with back end motion and continuation. So in that regard, although the max bias slows down and changes direction with a short hook window in the mid lane, it does also blend off the back of the lane in the dry back end with a smoother rolling and a slightly more forward characteristic than the radical conspiracy, which is definitely a longer, smoother hook window and a very blendy yet continuous change of direction for an asymmetrical ball. And the max bias is definitely clean through the front part of the lane, but changes direction so hard and so abrupt that it makes it an amazing ball for moderate launch angles on heavy oil conditions, your freshest, heaviest oil that you encounter. The number one ball out of your bag when you're bowling on a longer sport or tournament type condition, or if you have a house shot that has an incredibly high ratio, you're going to use this ball in the middle of the pattern with moderate launch angles, not necessarily bouncing it off the drive, but maybe keeping those angles a little more trapped, making sure to feed this ball as much head oil as possible, keeping your breakpoint a little closer to the pocket so that it has a good mid-lane hook set reaction. That is where this max bias is going to shine. Switching gears now and taking a look at the Rattler NU, this one also sits in a very unique place on the chart relative to the other releases in the current Radical lineup. This batch of releases was really geared toward expanding the areas of the chart that the balls are covering into new territory to give you the widest range of motions possible. And this one kind of took Radical fans by surprise, I think, but in a way that I think will be a very welcomed surprise. The Rattler NU is clearly the smoothest of the symmetrical options in the Radical offering, but you notice it's certainly not the weakest. It's actually built for a medium to medium light amount of oil volume. Surprisingly, this one won't require as much friction as traditional urethane or as the new blue would require to be in play. You can probably use this with shutdown angles and closed angles on a variety of medium patterns. Obviously, again, considering sport patterns, challenge patterns where your angles are closed and you're playing a little further right to really shine for this Rattler NU. But also, I think that you have some utility on the lighter house shots when they're fresh and you want to kind of preserve the oil in the middle of the lane for later in the block when you can open it up with a true reactive piece. This Rattler NU is going to shine as well. And I said earlier that I was going to talk to you guys about some use cases for this Rattler NU, and I'm talking about player styles here. So the first one is obvious. Any high rev or rev dominant player who finds it difficult to control the back end motion on cliffed house shots is going to fall in love with this Rattler NU. It gives you that early diggy motion that urethane is known for, but it just has better continuation without sacrificing control. It is not quick down lane by any stretch of the imagination, but it also doesn't have that level of give up that urethane motions give you, and it's not nearly as forward as urethane off the end of the pattern. So you can play it in the same zone of the lane as urethane, if not just a shade further in with a little more belly, and you're going to have an extra level of confidence that the ball is just going to go through the pins that much better because of its reactive characteristic. But surprisingly, I think the utility of this ball expands down into the low rev players for a different reason as well. When those high rev players are on those shorter, lighter challenge patterns, sport patterns, or just overall light oil summer patterns where the proprietors don't want to give you as much head oil or volume, when all of those higher rev players are in the urethane shapes and they're shaping them really well and they're getting them through the pins, lately low rev players have been at a distinct disadvantage because they simply cannot get the entry angle and the carry percentage with urethane that the high rev players can. So this Rattler NU is going to be an amazing fix for combating urethane as a low rev player. It's going to have more flare potential, and the reactive characteristic of the not urethane cover is going to give you more board coverage, something that a low rev player desperately needs. But overall, the familiarity of the shape of urethane is going to be inherent in this ball, even more so than the new blue. So high rev players on medium conditions, low rev players on the traditional shorter, lighter conditions, you're both gonna love this new Rattler NU. And I actually think this might be the better of the two new balls. Radical has done an amazing job at continuing to honor Mo's heritage with this brand new max bias. It's a ball that he would truly be proud of. There's nothing he loved more than extreme asymmetry and a chalky finish. Both of these balls pull new technology into the Radical lineup in terms of cover stocks, and they're both paired with tried and true core designs. They're kind of on the fringes of the Radical comparison chart, where ball motion hasn't been before for Radical. So that means that they might not be at the core of your arsenal for every league and tournament condition, but when the conditions require them, they are going to be just right, and they are going to excel at what they do. Pick both of these balls up beginning June 13th at your local pro shop. Since you're here, make sure you like and subscribe to my YouTube and Facebook page, Bowling Buckosh. Feel free to drop a comment below. I'm happy to respond whenever I have time. Of course, your engagement helps me help bowlers like you, so the more the better. Check back often because we've got a lot of new and exciting things coming up for Bowl Expo and into the fall bowling season, and I can't wait to share some of the information that we have coming out for you. I'll be making videos more often as Bowl Expo season starts to ramp up. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video.